I'm waiting for the beep. There we go. Hi everyone. This is the cert-manager bi-weekly dev community meeting, and it's Wednesday, the 1st of June, 2022. There's a lot of new faces here today, so maybe we'll just do a very quick whip round and introductions. So I'm Jake, I'm one of the maintainers. I work for JetStack and go Irbe.
Well, thanks, Jake. Irbe, I'm also one of the cert-manager maintainers, and I also work for JetStack. Ashley?
Also a cert-manager maintainer, also work for JetStack. Ashley right here. Stefan, would you like to go next?
Yeah, sure. I'm Stefan. I work for VMware, not a cert-manager maintainer, a cluster API maintainer. Yeah. So, Christian.
Hi, I'm also from VMware, colleague of Stefan. I'm also working on a cluster API project. Yeah. James?
Hey, yeah, I'm a cert-manager maintainer. I'm over at Apple now, previously at JetStack though. Yeah, that's me. Hello. I need to name someone else. Josh, you've just joined.
Hello, can you hear me? Yes. Yeah, I'm a work at JetStack. I'm a cert manager maintainer as well. I joined late, so who hasn't gone yet?
Kyle.
Carl.
Hi. Yep, Kyle. I'm with AWS. I help maintain the private CA issuer plugin. And I don't know who's next.
I can go. I'm Cody Eiler with VMware and relatively new to the company, and also trying to get embedded into some of the cert-manager stuff since we're leveraging it pretty heavily here. So thanks.
I can go next. My name is Joachim. I work for JetStack and part of the cert-manager maintainer team as well. Cheng, do you want to introduce yourself?
It also must be like the middle of the night for you, right?
Yeah.
Thank you for joining.
Yeah, so Cheng Jia is one of our Google Summer of Code like participants. So they are working on the test infrastructure. And we have one more.
I can go. Hi, I'm Peter. I also work at JetStack. I'm not a cert-manager maintainer. I'm CRE, but I'm just interested in one of the topics of today's meeting, so I thought I'd come and have a listen in.
Cool. There's one more person, but I don't know if they can talk either. Is it Li Xiaojun?
Hello, hi.
Hi.
Yeah, this is Xiaojun. Yeah, you can call me Joyce. Yeah, I'm working with Cody in VMware. We want to contribute to cert-manager. Yeah, so I just joined first time and want to listen. Yeah.
Awesome. So it's a lot of people, so we'll kind of blast through the agenda. So first up on the list is Stefan. Is there any interest in extending cainjector to be able to inject caBundles into arbitrary CRDs? And you've linked an issue, so take it away.
Yep. And I didn't use Google Meet for a while. Can I just share my screen here, and does it work?
Yeah, definitely. Well,
Okay,
hopefully, unless you're using Linux.
No, Mac. Oh, Bildschirm cannot be shared. Can someone else maybe just share it? It's enough to just open the issue for me.
Sure, I'll share it.
Maybe I have to go to my Mac settings somewhere and enable it or something. Who knows? Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. So Christian actually opened the issue. We're mainly here to just ask if the use case is something that cert-managers would be interested in to get implemented, and then I guess we can discuss solutions and whoever contributes, etc., etc. So we have the following situation in Cluster API. Essentially, we're using cert-managers in a while, and it's working great, but we mainly use it for mutating webhooks, validating webhooks series. And we now at the point that we are kind of implementing our own thing, which is very similar to admission webhook. And for that, we have our own CRD, which is called extension config. It's not super important, but it works very similar to the admission webhook configurations. And we have the same requirement that we want to be able to inject the CA bundle. So that's why we essentially have the requirement to be able to inject the CA bundle in, from cert-manager perspective, arbitrary CRD. Just the same way as it's possible to inject it in one of the, let's say, baked-in CRDs. What we see as kind of, from a cert-manager perspective, let's say, what has to be configurable or dynamic is something like cert-manager has to know in which CRD it would have to inject the CA bundle. It would have to know at which path, because you just don't know it before, because that CRD could have it in a different location, of course, compared to the built-in CRDs. And I think that's probably mostly it. Christian, did I miss something? I think probably those 2 or 3 things, right?
No, I think that's it. The solution outlined in the issue is just an example. It's not nothing we would say that's the way to go.
Yeah, definitely. So our main point is definitely just figuring out if that's something that, that the community wants to see in cert-manager or not. And then we could work on what would be a good way to implement it. I don't know, how would we expose it to users of cert-manager to make it configurable, etc.
So yeah, sorry, I hadn't actually seen this issue, although I'd have replied sooner in there. I think it's, so a few things jump out to me. First of all, the idea of being able to watch arbitrary things is pretty complex, because if we're looking across the whole cluster at every resource type to determine if they have an annotation to trigger, then we either need a explicit list of actual resource types to watch, because we can't, get a watch on everything, as well as appropriate RBAC configured and stuff like that before we can do it. The idea of having some kind of a path, like a bundle path, like you say there too, I think is definitely feasible, but it's moving and shifting around quite a lot of complexity. My first thought here is, for the extension config stuff, specifically, is actually having a controller, alongside your existing controllers that will pull from our resource types and effectively do the role of a CA injector for your types. I think within the scope of, and I speak now as one of the maintainers, but not all. I think within the scope of the cert-manager project, at least, I wouldn't envision CA injector like gaining these sorts of features without us actually seriously considering whether that should be a standalone component with its own sort of roadmap and things like that. Its original, the original intent when we created it was actually to support cert-manager itself, as well as other webhooks and stuff. So I think it's a really, really valid request. I really recognize the need. Personally, I'd be concerned about the feature creep within the CA injector, especially with the arbitrary stuff. And when it comes to extension config, maybe there's an exception there that can be made, but it does create certain interdependencies between we depend on, you depend on us and stuff like that. We have to do watches. If a cluster doesn't have an extension config type installed, we have to obviously handle that, and that's fine, can be done. But I would wonder if actually we're better off to then have something that stands on its own as a project. There's also some of the stuff around the trust and caBundles and stuff upstream that may become relevant here, which talks, and there's talks there about having things like validating webhooks be able to reference trust anchors in the core project from SIGAuth, which may be something that's also relevant to look at for extension config too.
Yeah, you said it, but I was going to mention the upstream trust bundles, and also we have a trust root distribution project that we're kind of iterating on in the background. It's in the same GitHub org, but it's just cert-manager/trust. I wonder if that would be a better place for it. I think this is a good problem. We want to solve it, but maybe not in CA injector. Maybe.
It sounds very valid to me. So our main thing was just we didn't just want to solve it on our side. We want to bubble the requirement up. It's definitely totally fine for us to. I mean, the problem is so even if we would decide to implement in C8 injector, which doesn't sound realistic, but even if we would, we still have to implement it on our side because our timeline is just too short to actually get anything in another project. And we have a POC. It seems to be fine. It's not that much code. So in any case, it's totally fine for us to implement on our side. And I think I have to take a look at that trust thing. So sounds good. I mean, if that's something that, or if that's a requirement that we can put there, and yeah, I don't know anything about it yet. Sounds like good idea to me.
Cool. Anyone else have anything they want to add to that?
I'll try and wrap up some of these comments as well onto your issue, so that there's a bit more of a history that you can share around too.
Cool. I will stop sharing that issue and move on to the next agenda item. This is from Ash, and it's about issuer setup timeouts. What are we going to do? And you link 3 PRs. So I'm sorry, I have no context for this, so I'll just pass straight over to you.
Yeah, no worries. The issue at the end is probably the one that is going to illustrate this the best, in that there are 16 people who've given it a thumbs up, and I don't think I've ever seen that level of interest in a issue on cert-manager. This is clearly hitting a hell of a lot of people. In very short, the setup process for some issuers, Venafi is one, 0 SSL I think is another. See, like some alternative Acme providers that aren't Let's Encrypt, the setup can take a while, like more than 10 seconds, and that's the current timeout that we have. People are chomping at the bit to increase it. The obvious thing to do is to increase that timeout for just setting up an issuer, because people probably aren't doing that frequently, and it's not likely to cause a problem to have that timeout be a minute more, whatever. The other thing is to let this be configurable on a per user basis, so that they can do this themselves. Like that, if they need a longer one for whatever issuer they're using, they can set that and forget it. The questions here mainly concern things like, well, what other timeouts should be configurable, and should this bubble up to other timeouts? Like, where should this change be made? I don't really have strong feelings about it or anything. I just thought it needed to be raised in this, because this is clearly affecting a lot of people. We clearly need a solution to it. I think the most simple solution of just bumping that timeout is probably fine. And in addition to all that, there is a PR in flight. Well, the 2 PRs, one replaces the other, that will start doing this, but probably isn't ready to merge straight away. I think James put his hand up first, so I'll pass over to him.
I'll keep it quick so Josh can speak too. I think absolutely, clearly, there's a need to change this. Let's go ahead and change it. I'd be reluctant to rush to expose it, to make it a variable that anyone can tweak without having a clear need for that. In that, like right now, we've got different issuer types of, it kind of dictate the length rather than a specific instance of an issuer, perhaps. I think as well, for anything, and I don't think it's quite at this point yet. You said it's more than 10 seconds. When it starts getting beyond like 30 seconds, a minute, and things like that, I think there's another conversation to be had here about these issuers allowing for like asynchronous setup and stuff like that, which is like historically the certificate controller, for example, or was the certificate controller when it spoke with Acme, that at one point did block for an extended period of time whilst it went off and did the whole issuance process. Obviously that didn't work particularly well, as issuances can take minutes to complete. So just as a general thought on like what our ceiling is here before we actually have to start thinking, and this can be on a per issuer basis, but thinking about like per issuer type basis, I should say, thinking about when we want to consider more async approaches.
Yeah, I think there was some discussion on this could maybe even go into the CRD for issuers and cluster issuers and have it be configurable on the resource rather than having it be a flag.
I think my, so I know Josh's got his hand raised. My reluctance to do that is that we're pushing things onto users that I think are more operators to consider, and less like an operator administrator's thing to consider, unless we're seeing many cases where one Acme issuer takes far longer to set up than another Acme issuer. That couldn't just be solved by having, say, a 30-second timeout. Like, how many people would still be thumbs upping this issue if we had a 30-second timeout from the start?
Josh?
Yeah, I think that pretty much covers everything I wanted to say. Basically, like, yeah, that 10 seconds is like super arbitrary. I don't know why that exists there in the first place, to be honest. What else did I want to say? There is something in Go that's like a client template or like a context client template or something. It's not called template, it's called something else, which might be interesting to look into around this issue. Yeah, I forget what it's called now. In any case, yeah, I think I agree that there needs to be like a strong case of how these things are configured by the user. Setting up a kind of global HTTP context deadline number sounds good, perhaps naively, but I think, as James was saying, I think that gets quite tricky quite quickly. And then to over-engineer the solution would be, okay, let's create a config file where you can define a different context deadline for each issuer, and all of a sudden it balloons into something a bit bigger than it perhaps needs to be. Yeah, I agree that perhaps just eliminating that 10-second and relying on the, I'm assuming, 30-second context deadline, that's probably the default somewhere, might just make the problem be removed completely. I don't know. Yeah.
Okay, there's a queue of hands now, so Joachim next.
Yeah, I just had a thought regarding the. Okay, it was arbitrary because I was thinking if we're approaching 30 seconds, it's quite reasonable that a lot of the same users would need to get closer to a minute or maybe even 2 minutes in some scenarios. So I think it's worth considering what the distribution would look like in some of these slower issuers. It just might do sense for the sort of default value, if you will.
I think the default value for web requests in browsers is 3 minutes, which is still very long. But I'm hijacking the queue. Irene is next.
Yeah, I was like originally arguing that maybe it would make sense to have the same flag for like all the operations against the CA rather than just like one flag for the issuer setup. Because like as it is in that issuer, the PR that suggests the issuer setup flag, it's actually like that context value is not used just for like setup. It's also going to be used for that like periodic health check that we'll eventually be doing for issuers. And we also have some work planned to do, or at least there has been an idea to do same health check in some of maybe the certificate requests, because we are hitting an issue where in some cases, issuance fails when issuer is not ready, and there isn't really like a reliable way how to do it. So like some of those API calls hypothetically could also be slow because the CI is slow, like various API operations could be slow. So I'm not sure if in that case it wouldn't be like better for users if it was the same context for all these operations rather than having to implement another flag for issuance as well, if we were to go for a flag.
Peter, I think is this the issue that you joined to talk about?
Yeah, sorry, I clicked the wrong button. I took my hand down and then went to the unmute. Yeah, I was just I was wondering if issuer setups are taking a long time, then might it not be a case that follow-up actions like issuing a certificate might also take a long time. I've noticed it with TPP that it can take very different time for different customer setups in terms of what they do in TPP when that certificate request gets there and how quickly their CA responds, and they might have like additional workflows. I did write an issue, but I wasn't sure if it's entirely very clear, so I can link to it afterwards as an option.
That would be great. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I definitely can see that happening. I think one thing to note in TPP case, at least last I looked, the certificate request implementation for TPP is also synchronous. That might have changed though since I last wrote it, which I think is kind of part of the problem here, because Acme, that certificate request implementation, that's asynchronous, so it will kind of get started and then it's able to pick up and continue. Oh, it is async now. Great. Yeah, so there may well be that if you're talking about like HTTP context deadline exceeded things because there's just a really slow request, then yeah, definitely I think adjusting some of those deadlines for TPP makes a lot of sense. We've got a little bit more flexibility there, I think, because we have controllers per issuer type, which yeah, it's a lot more helpful.
So it sounds like we're broadly in favor of just increasing the arbitrary deadline to arbitrarily a bit longer, but then we should think better about how we do long-running operations asynchronously in general. Is that correct?
If I just throw out 45 seconds as a number, if I just bumped that and that became the default just for creating an issuer, like nothing else, didn't touch anything else at all, and see if that fixes people, like that seems like the smallest possible change, and see if we bump anything after that.
For that, my only thing to call out here with something like if we're just changing those kind of reference lines to 45 seconds, if you do have issuers, like say you've got a cluster with 100 issuers in there, and some of them are configured to talk to endpoints that say just timeout, or do something like that, it does, given we only have a certain number of workers processing these, it does present a means for you to actually block progress of other issuers. It may not be quite so bad, but I guess yes, I'm 100% in favor of let's just increase it. It's difficult because we're stumbling blind because we don't actually know what a reasonable value is, and that's kind of difficult.
Maybe Peter has some data from like real world places, or maybe not. I don't know.
I mean,
somewhere yes, but
carry on.
I think 30 seconds would probably be fine from what I've seen. Like most of the things I've seen are based on 10-second timeouts where it looks like it's just after that, and then basically gets dropped and then the request goes through, and then I'm talking about certificate issuance rather than issuer, but I can imagine it's similar for issuer. It just takes a little bit longer than that. But at the same time, I wouldn't like to say just dump it at 20 seconds and then immediately get another issue because someone says it takes me 21 seconds. So
I seem to remember that, like, I talked to someone at KubeCon who was using Sectagon who also had this kind of issue, and I think that I mentioned even longer, like maybe even like a minute or something like that. But it would be, yeah, I think like the Sectagon users was also one big section of people who did thumbs up on that issue, so probably it would be worse to ask them also.
I guess I can hunt down anyone who's talked about this and see if there's a consensus on what kind of numbers, maybe put out a poll or something. But I guess the number can be X for now, and then down the road we can, sorry, the number can be whatever for now, but the key is that to start off, we'll just change that default just for the issuer creation and see where we go from there. The PRs that we currently have in flight are bigger things that add flags and whatever, and we'll just kick that can down the road if we might not need to add anything.
I think maybe if
I was going to say, I kind of hate myself for saying this. Does it make sense for us to create an emergency flag where you can change the deadline for this specific context, which unblocks everyone who is affected by this specific issue? And while we're, as you say, flying blind, we set it to 30 as the new default, and users who will experience connections longer than that time do have a kind of escape hatch for the time being, while in the meantime we come up with a more sensible time or kind of machinery around this. Is that insane?
I think that's completely logical and the obvious thing to do for me, but I'm not really willing to fight for it. That's what these PRs are doing, I think, is to add something like that. I don't really see a huge maintenance burden by making this configurable, but the easiest thing is to just change the default that's hard coded and be done with it.
You can never remove flags. That's the problem.
But like, who cares? Like,
You can if you make the prefix to the flag. This flag is going to be removed in the next release. It's by using this flag, you know what you're doing, and you know yada 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 yada. It's set up, issuer, verify, context, deadline. Blah blah blah.
I personally, and I'm sure you probably guessed, I think I've got myself a name for being very conservative with any kind of configurable options. I would be concerned because I think one thing that it would make a bit odd is, say we go and make some of these asynchronous, like we just talked about. What does that flag mean in that context then? Can we maintain the meaning of that flag in a future world with the changes we want to make to the project? Maybe we can, maybe that's all fine, but yeah, I would just lean on the side of, if that deadline's too short, let's make it longer and also add some clear monitoring and metrics in so that we can actually gather feedback. And if a user comes back in a month's time and says, oh, this is still a problem, then I think, we're going to have more data to work with, as well as, an ability to move forward. Like, realistically, if there's one user out of tens of thousands of people who is still having issues because their server is taking longer than 30 seconds to respond, that to me feels like we've hit 99.9% of good cases. But yeah.
A argument against that, though, I would say, is that if we bump the number up and it still doesn't catch 30% of users, the metrics coming back are not going to be useful, because the metrics coming back are going to say the request took 30 seconds or whatever the number is.
Also,
that would be a rebuttal to
users are going to have servers that may not actually respond at all within 30 seconds or anything else. They're going to start hitting network timeouts, because 30 seconds to make a single HTTP request is getting into like forever territory in terms of computer time to me. But yeah, I get what you're saying though. Yeah. I've got a drop, so anyway, speak to you soon.
So yeah, I'm not willing to go to bat for it, so I'll do the smallest possible change that won't get blocked, which I think will probably be changing the hard-coded value. But I'll reach out to people on GitHub and see if they've got any feelings about it, and add that to the issue if I get any feedback on that. I guess we can move on.
Just a quick question. If we change the hard-coded value, does it mean that we cannot change it back anymore? Would it, because that would potentially break some people? Like, change it back to a lower value? Would that be an issue?
It was arbitrary before, so having it arbitrary later, I don't really think it would.
Honestly, if for issuer creation, if it went forever and we didn't really have a timeout, I would care very, very little, because anyone that's creating many issuers and this becomes a problem, like, they've probably got something else going on. But I would tend towards whatever's most likely to get merged. We could use some kind of retry Cody, but the problem is that this is taking a long time in the first place. Like, the first request to create this issuer takes ages. So even retrying, like, it's going to take 30, 40, however long seconds every time, even with exponential backoff. Like, the services are just slow, or the thing is just slow in the back end. Yeah, that too. Thank you for the suggestion, though. Oh, one thing actually is, if we do bump this up to X 30 whatever seconds, is like, probably this doesn't meet the criteria for something we would usually backport and cut a release for. But if we just have it in release 1.9, nobody's going to use it for months. Should we backport this and release it?
I would. It's effective. From my opinion, it's a bug that's affecting people.
Yeah, I agree.
Yep, I agree.
Cool. Then I will probably next week I'll try and get some numbers out of people and see where we can move forward with it.
Yeah, but we can just release the arbitrary increase very soon. Cool. Any last words before we move on? Science is golden. So the next item is that we have an accepted Google Summer of Code proposal, and congratulations to Chengja, who is listening on the call but can't speak. I think thanks for Hervé for taking this on and mentoring as well.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward. I think it's going to be very valuable. Zhaicheng will be working on setting up some tooling that will make it easier for maintainers and contributors to deploy cert-manager and external dependencies, kind of like sort of share installation scripts. So that should save us a lot of time and help us to do things like debug issues and add new functionality. So it's going to be great.
Yeah, really good to have you with us, and well, involved. Good to get involved. I guess that's probably it for that point, unless anyone has anything else to say. Cool. The next one has no name attached to it, but it is a feature-gated API field documentation PR. Yeah, it's got Hervé's name against it, so I will pass over to Hervé.
Cool. Yeah. No, I mean, I just wanted to briefly talk about that. I just wanted to document the mechanism, how we created how we so far, or at least that is once, have been creating like those alpha API fields. Maybe you can open the commit and just because I have some, I feel like there are a couple of foot guns in how we are doing it right now, and I'm just interested in what people's thoughts are. So at the moment we do it by having two feature flags, one on webhook, one on controller, and you have to enable both for the feature to actually be working. So the alpha or whatever feature gated field will always be visible in the API if you look at the custom CRD with kubectl explainer or something like that, but it will actually only function if both feature fields are enabled, and it will be rejected in webhook if you try to use it but you have not enabled the webhook feature field. And then there's some potential edge cases where if you enable just one but not the other, then it may behave in a weird way. And also if you enable it, have some resources that have that field, and then disable it afterwards, forget to remove the fields from your resources, then it may also behave in a weird way when the controller syncs it and tries to update the spec of your custom resource. So obviously going to fail in webhook. So yeah, I'm just interested if people maybe have some thoughts about that or some comments. I guess from one point of view, we don't care so much about because it is alpha, so it's kind of you use it at your own risk. I think the API specifics is always a popular topic, as it's
hard to respond straight away without really thinking about it. So
okay, cool. So maybe it's just good that I mentioned it, and maybe people can just comment and take a look at it. Cool, that sounds good to me.
Put a mental note and a note in the document to review this PR. Sound good to anyone else?
Sounds good to me. I just need to sit down and read about it, and as you say, think about it.
Yeah, thanks for bringing it up. it is important. Okay. Next up is my item, which is just a 2-minute announcement. If you happen to be using OpenShift, then you're probably not using Ingress. You're probably using OpenShift's custom root CRD, custom resource definition. These don't consume TLS secrets the same way that Ingress does. They don't reference a secret, so they're much harder to use with cert-manager. So I put a new project in the cert-manager org, cert-manager / OpenShift roots. And this is just a controller that will issue certificate requests and populate OpenShift roots. So if you're using OpenShift and you think it would be useful, then please use it and give me some feedback, or come and talk to us in cert-manager channel on Kubernetes Slack. And yeah, it's just an announcement, so no real questions, I hope. Next item is Josh moving docs of subprojects into cert-manager.io.
Yes, this I think hopefully will be a bit uncontroversial. I mean, yeah. Basically, I want to move all of the readmes of the subprojects which contain documentation style words into cert-manager.io. So this is an effort to move the documentation of cert-manager and all the subprojects onto the website. Basically, I think I don't want us to have any user-facing information not on the website. I want everything to be on the website. So if I go to github.com/approver policy, I will see information about the GitHub project approver policy. And then somewhere relevant, it will say, if you want to use this thing, then here's a link to the website with the relevant documentation. And that's good for two things. It consolidates the information, has the information display consistently, and also helps kind of bring awareness just through like osmosis about the other projects in cert-manager generally. So yeah, I think if people are happy, I'll just go ahead and do that. Should be just a bit of a copy and paste job, hopefully. Yeah.
Sounds good to me. Our documentation is hard to find right now for some things.
I will go ahead and do that after this call. I say that. Hopefully it doesn't take too long, but let's see.
Any last words on that?
No, just a +1. I think it's really good. Just Googling cert-manager and whatever else is gonna be a better user experience. I think if we add more documentation to the website.
Yeah,
cool.
I'd say it's going to be helpful, just for awareness with customers around. Oh, we got this. There's an additional open source thing that you can use that might actually tackle the use case. So just from that perspective, really good. It'd be really handy, and it looks nice when it comes from the cert-manager.io website as well.
Nice. So that's the least controversial thing so far. Just go and do it. Right. So we've reached the end of the agenda, which means that anyone who isn't interested in us looking at our test flakes, you feel free to drop off, or if you find it interesting, we'll take a quick look at our test grid status and see if there are any new test flakes that we will need to fix. Well, yeah, so I will open this and share it. Doesn't look incredible, to be honest.
It's actually not, but like I feel like I think something might have changed in test grid because they're actually in the worst state. Like if you look at previous, there's quite a bunch that are failing, but it kind of shows purple. Like the ones against, yeah, like the 119, 120.
0 of 9 recently passed. What is the
Yeah,
actual
I think that these are all the gateway ones failing, but I'm not entirely sure. If you scroll down, did something pass? Yeah, I think it's the gateway ones that all failed. I also think it's only worse to look at the very latest ones because there was some change applied to it today as well, so probably. And like I think the gateway ones is mostly for some reason like, and we have this in like quite a lot of tests, but the anyway thing in contour basically is in unready state, I think. But you can look at the, if you actually click on it, maybe like on the red box, on the thingy.
These are not gateway tests though. These are just anything.
Are they not?
This is just everything has failed.
Okay.
Like the gateway ones are up here, which they did fail, but like one of these is HTTP 01.
So perhaps there's more issues than that.
DNS 01, yeah, definitely. Well, if you know the gateway ones are flaky, let's just click on one of them that isn't. Oh, but this just looks like resource contention. If you just get random timeouts, right?
I actually can't see the update. I think maybe my screen hasn't refreshed or something, but like I only see the tab with the whole of test grid and not the queue.
Sorry. Although it's not very useful for me to share it. Maybe you could just look at the link. But whenever it's just a unexpected timeout, it's usually, I think these were like resource issues on the node, or like networking being broken, or just something.
So I think like
So the time on the right-hand side, is that per test?
Yeah.
Or is it an interval? Okay, it's per test, yeah. Well, that makes sense. If it takes 5 or 8 minutes, they should definitely time out.
But this timeout is not from the testers per se. Like the timeout that you see right now on the screen, it's just a badly implemented loop in a test that looks for something like a ready condition on the certificate and times out.
Yeah.
That's where the timeout comes from. So basically it's, and like, for example, like what I saw in gateway tests, it's often like it looks for ready condition on the certificate and or something like that, and it just gets something like couldn't reach the gateway API or not the gateway API, but the.
Should I actually open one of the logs and see what happens?
So
it's not very useful. It's just, yeah, it sets up an issuer, waits for the issuer to be ready, then the issuer is ready, then it creates a CSR and then waits for it to be ready for 5 minutes, and then if it isn't ready in 5 minutes, it just says it's a timeout. So it's not actually, the logs are not useful, sorry.
For this particular one, no. This also is Acme. I think like for the gateway ones, we had better logs.
Yeah, actually gonna look for a gateway one. Like this one. Just says issuing.
But it should show, does it not show the challenge custom resource that would have that error if it did have the timeout? Like, does it not print it somewhere? Cool, yeah, it does here. So if you look at like the status of that.
I have no idea what I'm looking for. So.
Just scroll a little bit more down.
Whoop.
Cool. Oh, that's actually something different.
Has no events. That seems suspicious to me.
How do we make it easier to see what's actually going wrong? I mean, this is already much more info than I'm used to seeing. So,
like, we can always, I mean, like, we can look at the actual logs from the pods, but then it's kind of hard to relate to the actual, to the specific test. But sometimes it has something useful. But yeah, I think in this case, maybe there's no point to look at this. I think we would need to rerun this specific test. There isn't enough logs, and we should try to just somehow change this test so it outputs more logs, I guess.
Yeah. Well, we did look at test grid, which is on the agenda, and it's not very happy. So I guess we really should put some time aside for. Yeah, I mean, I know you've been doing it for at least a week, but trying to unflake some of these tests.
Yeah, it's like you fix it in one place, it just like falls apart in the other corner. Yeah, no.
Sorry, go on.
You go.
I feel obligated to mention as well the thing I found last JetStack in person, where David Bond discovered that some of our unit tests are firing off to external DNS servers, and there's flakiness waiting to happen there as well. It's not just the end-to-end.
What was that again? Did you remove that, or?
It's still there, I think. We have I've not got a link to hand immediately, but we have like unit tests which fire off to Google DNS servers every time. So unit test should never do that, right? Like, it's nuts.
At least the current tests look mostly good, but the previous ones not good. Cool. Well, I don't personally think we'll get much more value out of staring at test grid in this call, but it does highlight we should pay more attention to it.
Yeah, I feel like staring at test grid is not that valuable. Like, it would be good if we had some tool where we could just like aggregate those errors and somehow like parse them in a bit more meaningful way. But
Mail's not in this meeting, but he did write a bunch of tooling to get useful information out of Prel. Might ask him next week when when we're back from our monarchy-related holiday.
Rule Britannia.
I have some knitted horses set up in my village for the well, as a decoration, I guess.
I live
Very
opposite a
early.
pub. It's going to be carnage. Might a zombie apocalypse going to border up the windows and stuff.
Can you put
Well,
up a
that-
webcam and stream it?
Yeah, we should stream it
uh,
random channel.
It's an interesting idea, although my privacy might take a dip doing such thing.
True, true.
But you don't have to stream your house, just through the window.
You could work out where I live.
Right. I think we have reached the end of cert-manager related discussions. So I'll say thanks to all the attendees, and feel free to reach out at any time on GitHub issues or cert-manager dev channel on Kubernetes Slack. And yeah, thanks for watching if you're watching the recording.